So I think we'll get started now. We were waiting for a couple more people to come, but because we're also live streaming this event, we want to start it promptly for those who are watching online. And I see that we're already getting some questions in by Twitter, so that's good to see. So welcome to everybody, and thank you for coming to this launch event of the Vaping is Not Tobacco campaign. I'm Brandon Mitchner, Managing Partner of Instinctive Partners here in Brussels. I'll be the moderator, and I'm joined by Dustin Dahlman and Mose Giacomello. Dustin is the spokesperson of the committee, the European Citizens Initiative, Let's Demand Smarter Vaping Regulation. He's also chairman of a German e-cigarette industry association called Bündnis für tabakfreien Genuss, and he's managing director of the German e-cigarette company InnoSigs, as well as a former smoker. Mose Giacomello is the vice chair of the committee. He's president of VAP Italy, an independent vaping exhibition organizer. They organize vaping events all around Italy. He is also a deputy spokesperson of the ECI and a former smoker. It's a recurring theme I think you'll hear during the course of the day. They'll give short introductions. It should be about 15-20 minutes, and then plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Just a reminder to people who are watching by live stream, you can send questions by Twitter. You just use the hashtag #VapingIsNotTobacco with two T's there in the middle, and we will ask the questions then at the end. Without further ado, I'd ask Dustin to kick it off.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Thank you all for showing up. I'm Dustin Dahlman, and I'm here today in my personal capacity as a European citizen, as a former smoker, and as a user of e-cigarette. Let me tell you why I choose to start this campaign and why I'm personally convinced. Back in 2010, I was 24 years old. I already smoked for more than 10 years because I started smoking pretty early when I was 13. My brother is 6 years older than me and also started to smoke as a young teenager. In 2010, he already had been smoking for more than 15 years. He was a heavy smoker. His health and his fitness suffered because of smoking. At that time, he was not able to complete a 400-meter run. In 2010, we went together on a trip to the US. We met a guy at the bar, and this guy was vaping. We had no idea what he was doing when we saw him using the e-cigarette. We got into a conversation with him. My brother tried it and immediately felt that this device satisfied his craving for nicotine. Back in Germany, he did some research on the product, bought some e-cigarettes, and managed to quit smoking within a few weeks. Before that, he already tried many times with nicotine replacement therapies, like chewing gum, patches, pills, or hypnosis, and he failed. With the e-cigarette, he managed to quit smoking almost from one day to another. First, I was skeptical. But very quickly I quit smoking with the help of the e-cigarette too. Today we feel as much better, are very into sports, and it's no problem for us to run a 10K. This personal success story is typical for millions of vapers that already switched, and also for all those pioneers who are shaping the industry today. Behind every vapor there is a personal success story like ours. Often they smoke for much longer time, and the e-cigarette maybe helped them to save their life. Let me explain on the next slide. Okay, sorry.
Thank you, Dustin. Well, I'm Mose Giacomello. I'm a former smoker for so many years I don't want even to remember. My story as a vapor starts in 2012 when one day I asked my 12 years old daughter which present she wanted for her birthday. And she told me, Dad, I'd like you to stop smoking. From that day, I was thinking about a way of stopping smoking, and since e-cigarettes were appearing, I entered into an e-cigarette shop. I got my first e-cigarette. From that day, I touched the cigarette again. After a few years, in 2015, I started a new activity. The name is VAP Italy. It's a vaping exhibition. It's among the biggest in Europe, with more than 20,000 visitors per year. And from that point of view, is let's say I have a privileged view of the market because what we are seeing is really hundreds of companies that started in this market. In Europe, there are mainly companies making liquids and they're working with flavors because they have understood that flavors helps smokers switching to vaping, but also the change of flavors when somebody get tired of a specific flavor. They can change, try new flavors, and stay in vaping and not going back to smoking.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. What are the products we are talking about? Let me explain. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Here you see some supporters of our campaign. So that are the supporters that applied so far. But we got a lot of questions from other associations and consumer association, and also from consumer groups that would like to join the supporters group. Let me explain you what are the products we are talking about. E-cigarette is a modern battery-powered device that heats the flavored liquid until it vaporizes, allowing it to be inhaled without combustion. The name e-cigarette is a blessing and a curse at the same time. On the one hand, this name is a signal to smokers that this product might be of interest to them. On the other hand, the name seems to be the why this product is restricted like tobacco by the regulators and health authorities, even though it does not contain any tobacco. The most common open devices feature a tank filled with e-liquid from a bottle, which allows a high degree of customization. Some e-cigarettes have pre-filled liquid capsules or cartridges that are inserted directly into the device. In any case, these liquids, whether contained in bottles or pre-filled capsules, do not contain any tobacco. The liquid used in vaping products may or not may contain nicotine. Yeah, let me explain why we do this campaign. First, we see a disconnect between regulators and the reality on the science of vaping. In recent years, many studies have shown that vaping is much less harmful than smoking. Nevertheless, the product is perceived by the majority of people as being just as harmful or even more harmful as the tobacco cigarette. Another point is that vaping is not tobacco and should not be regulated as such. There are fundamental differences between smoking and vaping. We demand that these differences be taken into account in a separate legislation. Another important point is that vaping has been demonstrated to be at least 95% less harmful than smoking. Vaping should not be seen as a chance, should be seen as a chance for smokers to quit their very harmful habit. It should be promoted for smokers. Every smoker who switches to e-cigarette is a winner in terms of both personal and public health. We see another point, that is, vaping is proven to help smokers to switch to less harmful alternatives. If you want to quit smoking, it's a fact that e-cigarette use improves the likelihood of success. Millions of people in Europe have already stopped smoking with the help of e-cigarette, and the authorities can no longer ignore that. We call for an end to discrimination of vaping products and for creation of a separate framework. The e-cigarette is a technical device. Fundamentally different from tobacco, it contains no tobacco, and vaping is not tobacco. The category is highly dynamic with new products almost every week. This development should not be blocked by excessive administrative burdens and restrictions. Here I have some examples who is saying that. Today, no independent scientific authority that has dealt with the subject denies that vaping is a much less harmful alternative for smokers. For example, Dr. Ute Mons, head of the German Cancer Research in Germany, says, the major potential of tobacco cigarette to cause damage comes from the fact that the tobacco is burned. The burning process produces thousands of substances, several hundred of them, which are considered toxic or even carcinogenic. one does not have this damage potential with the e-cigarette. Another quote from the Public Health in England says that the constituents of cigarette smoke that harm health, including carcinogens, are either absent in e-cigarette vapor, or if present, they are mostly at levels much below 5% smoking doses, mostly below 1% and far below safety limits for occupational exposure. The main chemicals present in e-cigarettes only have not been associated with any serious risk. Another quote from the Economic Social Environment Council from France says, "We regret the strict regulatory environment to which the electronic cigarette is subjected. It represents a prudence on the part of public authority that is probably excessive. While the risk of normalizing smoking justifies a ban on sales to minors and ban on vaping in certain public spaces, rules on their advertising, identical in effect to those that apply for tobacco, slow its use as a tool for smoking cessation." These quotes are just exemplary of many from health organizations, agencies, and governments that have reviewed the evidence on tobacco harm reduction. Let's have a look at the statement on the next slide from Professor Dr. Riccardo Polosa, who is a researcher with an interest on cures on smoking-related disease and alternative tools for smoking cessation.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to call for a smarter vaping regulation. As in countries where vaping promotion is causing unprecedented fast decline in smoking prevalence, also EU should embrace the principle of tobacco reduction and promote combustible-free nicotine delivery technologies for the greater good of European citizens. Smokers and vapers deserve best quality vaping products, correct information about the true risk-benefit ratio, and wider access to these new technologies. Therefore, a sensible, proportionate, evidence-based regulation of vaping products that takes into account their much reduced risk compared to conventional cigarettes is very much needed. I call on the EU Commission to adopt an ad hoc smarter directive which sets vaping technologies apart from tobacco and pharmaceuticals products. Ladies and gentlemen, this can be truly a golden opportunity to make serious progress against one of the deadliest epidemics in Europe. Let's not waste it.
Okay, so let's see what we are asking, what are our goals. Basically, what we would like to have is a separate legislative framework or directive that will, first of all, inform smokers about the relative safety of vaping compared to smoke. And we also want that smokers have easy access to vaping products in helping them in the transition from smoking to vaping. But as it is in the current directive, we want also to be able to prevent minors accessing the vaping product as they cannot access tobacco products, and also that the communication of the vaping products will not be targeted to young people. As a consumers, we also want to be guaranteed on the products that are on the market. We want quality, we want safety, and we want good products available on the market. So, what is a European Citizens Initiative? European Citizen Initiative is an instrument where citizens can propose or ask for legislation changes. The scope for us is to create a proportionate and evidence-based regulatory environment that guarantees high quality standards and protect the young people while allowing smokers to have access to vaping products that can help them in replacing or reducing smoking. How it works. An ECI requires to collect 1 million signatures in the whole community and in a 1 year time frame. And then we have to push the Commission to consider a different approach and a different set of rules. But we also want to raise awareness about the inconsistency of the current legislative framework. As an added value, and that's something new for us, we will enable vapers to voice their opinion to the legislators, and we will see later on the way. So basically, that's our platform, the Vaping is Not Tobacco web platform. Inside that platform, there is the European Commission software for collecting signatures. So signatures will be collected by a Commission-provided technology. Okay, and people will be able to sign with a different set of rules based on each country. So the kind of data that have to be provided will depend on the single country. But just selecting the country, everybody will see which data have to provide, if it needed a passport or whatever.
Just before the press conference, we checked and we're already up to?
Well, we were to 1,300 signatures, and we just started in this day, so we are quite confident on that. Okay, and as a next step, we are using this, let's say, quite new tool for us that is a platform that allows citizens to reach their MAP or their candidate in this period and to tell them what they think about vaping and how they want it regulated. So it's creating a bottom-up movement that will create sensibility in the legislator. It will also help people to share the campaign on social media, and we want to create a real momentum for changing. That's the platform for the grassroots campaign, and we will also ask vapers to tell and to write their own story, as Dustin and myself did before. Behind every vapor there's a story about how he changed from smoking tobacco to vaping.
So with that, we'd now like to invite you to ask questions. I just remind the people who are watching online to submit questions via Twitter with the hashtag #VapingIsNotTobacco. And for those in the room, if you ask a question, it'd be nice if you could introduce yourself before, just so we know who's asking. Thanks. Who's got the first question? Katie.
Hello, Katie Jennings with Politico.
There is a roving microphone as well, so thanks.
Katie Jennings with Politico. So what I hear you saying is that vaping helped you and others quit smoking, and I've heard the term smoking cessation. But if something is going to be marketed specifically as a smoking cessation tool, it needs to go through clinical trials and be regulated by the European Medicines Agency or other national authorities. So what I'm wondering is how you can advertise vaping as a smoking cessation tool without having to submit to those requirements. So how can you have both of those things?
Who'd like to take it?
Well, in reality, we're talking about a smoking alternative. That is not really the same thing. We have stories of vapors, and as it was said before, we are talking about millions of people that were able to switch partially or totally from smoking to vaping. But this is not, let's say, a cure for a disease that will be the medical approach. It's not a disease, it's just a bad habit. It's like moving from, let's say, alcoholic beer to non-alcoholic beer. You're just substituting one bad habit with something that is less dangerous to you. And that's the scientific base we are using as of now.
Follow-up question? Okay.
Sure, actually, yeah, if that's okay. So what I'm wondering is about the campaign itself and using social media. So what happened yesterday is the UK Advertising Standards Authority is investigating British American Tobacco for how they were promoting Vape, which is their e-cigarette product. Because currently there are, well, it varies by country, but there are rules around being able to promote e-cigarette products. And so are you worried about that, and how will you deal with kind of those restrictions on publicizing anything beyond factual information about e-cigarettes?
Yeah. I don't know something about these investigations, but I have to point out that we ask for an customized regulation for vaping products, and of course we just want to target adults that smoke and nobody else. We think that the youth protection that is in the framework and in the national laws is a good and an important point, and we will respect that, and we ask our members, for example, in the national associations to respect not to sell to minors long before official laws applied. So we want to point out that we will target adult smokers with the advantages of the e-cigarette and help them to switch.
Okay. Other questions here in the room? So well, you're thinking of some. We've got one from online. It's actually Dave Keating, who's a journalist who wanted to be here but couldn't. He says, it'd be great if you could say which political parties you think understand that vaping is not tobacco, and how you think people should vote in the European elections.
Maybe this question implies that this person wants to hear something like vote for the liberals and avoid the greens or something like that. But that is something we don't think is the right way. We hope that in the next parliament will be MEPs that support an evidence-based legislation for a product, and no matter from which party or group they are, support rules that make sense for a product that do not contain tobacco and is regulated as such. So we give no advice to vote for somebody. We give the advice to get in touch with your local MEP, to ask him and to inform them about the product and what he's thinking and what will be his action in the parliament when it comes to e-cigarettes.
Question there on the back. Just wait for the microphone just a second.
Hi, my name is Dennis. I'm from Inline Policy. I was wondering what kind of policy framework would you like to promote regarding vaping regulation, considering that all the regulatory framework will have to be taken out from the Tobacco Products Directive. and what kind of like policy framework should be promoted in the next commission for vaping?
Sorry, can you ask that question again? We both did not understand it very well.
What kind of policy framework should be promoted under the next commission, considering that vaping is regulated and e-cigarettes are regulated under the Tobacco Products Directive? How do you think you should go about with a new policy framework that would regulate vaping in a different?
Okay, well, we said a different regulation. I don't know exactly the legislative framework where to insert it, but what we are asking mainly is to remove the limitations that are within the current Tobacco Products Directive. There are some points, not only on communication. I just make as an example the fact that a new product have to wait and sit there for 6 months before being presented to the market. Is something that at this moment in time is not producing any good. It's stopping the evolution of products. So we asked for something that could be more, let's say, in consumer products as a kind of example, with, in any case, a good level of security for consumers. Levels of securities that are in many other products on the market, but with the ability to evolve the market and to attract as much smokers as possible.
Next question, Katie.
So do you think that vaping should be allowed inside? What we've seen is, for instance, the European Commission has said that vaping products, like tobacco products, people need to go outside to use them. What do you think about that?
It's not our interest to really normalizing smoking when this is the question you ask. It should be to everybody who owns a house, and stadium, or a concert hall, to decide on his own if he want to allow it or not. Yeah? Yeah.
How much money do you anticipate spending on the campaign as a whole?
At the moment, we have spent it with the associations altogether around 30,000. We asked the Commission 2 days ago to update the websites, and during this campaign we will update from time to time all the contributions we get from associations or other companies.
Is Brexit going to be so one thing that came up in the Science and Technology Committee is that with Brexit, the UK could potentially no longer be subject to the Tobacco Products Directive, so it could become a more open market. So I guess my question is, do you think Brexit will be good for vaping in some markets?
I don't know if I understand the question right. People from UK can sign for this petition, and till the day UK will leave the European Union, and nobody knows when that will be, the votes for them for this initiative stay valid. Yeah, and another question was something about the regulation in Great Britain?
Yes, and so so first of all, thank you. That's good to know that the votes stay valid. The signatures stay valid. My question, and you might not be able to answer this because it's more UK specific, but it's one thing that I have heard people talk about is that when the UK leaves the EU, then they could no longer be subject to the Tobacco Products Directive, which means that it could open up restrictions on advertising and other stuff. So my question was about that.
Yeah, of course, you're right. I cannot say something about the legislation that is planned in the UK, but I can say that the UK health authorities and also the government understands the reduction principle very well. So they do separate cigarettes already from tobacco, and they see a difference there. And I think that is a good example also for the European Union.
So I would insert a question that we got online here while other people are thinking of more questions. We sort of answered this at the beginning, but is there any proof that vaping products help people eventually stop smoking? So even though it's not marketed as a smoking cessation tool, is there proof that it actually helps? We got anecdotal evidence. Is there more than anecdotal evidence?
No, I think that we have to make this question to scientists, to people that that spent years in studying vaping and evaluating it as a smoking cessation tool. We cannot make statements on that in their name, obviously. So the question could be different. How are institutions working to get serious and real scientific data on vaping as a smoking cessation? Because as of now, we see a lot of single institutions doing it, but single research centers, but not really from governments and health institutions.
Any other questions here in the room? We've got one there in the back. If you could just introduce yourself as well.
I'm John Bethel, I'm from CREAB.
Okay.
So there's a large concern from the consumer about the sheer variety of different ingredients in various vaping products, particularly with regard to propylene glycol, which in studies, when it's heated, can become carcinogenic, according to some studies. Do you think adequate research has been done into propylene glycol and other vaping ingredients that might potentially become carcinogenic when subject to heat?
Who would like to take that?
Answer to that. Yeah, you're talking in this case of the transformation in aldehydes and other substances that may become cancerogenic. But this will happen at temperatures that are well above the temperature of the personal vaporizers. And real, let's say, and fair studies demonstrates that this is not happening in vaping. While this is happening in smoking, because you have some propylene glycol also on the tobacco, and over there you can effectively notice the production of those substances. But in vaping, at the temperatures they are working that are usually below 200 degrees, this is not happening. Again, it's a scientific response, and I'm sure we have some research available that states this.
Yeah. I can add that I can refer to the quote I shown. The main chemicals present in e-cigarettes only have not been associated with any serious risk. That is what Public Health England says.
Any other questions here in the room? I've got a couple more from Twitter. So what can tobacco companies do to prevent teens from getting addicted to nicotine by vaping? Should the EU step in to regulate teens' access to nicotine?
Well, as we said for vaping, it is also true for tobacco. We not only have to prevent the minors to access these products, probably we will have to enforce it, because we know that young guys are also experimenting with tobacco, but it's even more important to inform the youth about that. So it's more cultural approach about the damage of the tobacco and the fact that nicotine creates dependence.
Do we have any questions in the room? Katie again.
Just on the Public Health England study, so it wasn't, I mean, it was basically like a consensus of people sitting in a room coming to that agreement rather than like a longitudinal study over time examining this. So, and they acknowledge that there needs to be further studies and evidence. So can you just address when people say that that 95% figure really isn't based on much tangible evidence, but was an evaluation of what was the best knowledge at the time in 2015?
I think that's a question, you're right, scientists have to answer. But we have, as I have shown, many quotes from Health Organization and researchers and scientists who deal with this topic, and that says there is no evidence that the e-cigarette will be same as harmful as the tobacco cigarette. So we have no doubts that there is in fact the same health risk. So everybody from the authorities and agencies that looked into this say e-cigarettes are much less harmful and are a good opportunity for smokers to switch.
At the same time, how would you address people who say that the precautionary principle should be applied, which is to say that like before something comes on the market, that there should be precautionary measures if there isn't enough evidence to show if there's some, I mean, basically what we're looking at is they're less harmful, but there still could be harm, right? There's like a and I don't want to use the 95% figure, but there is a percentage that could still be harmful, even though it's less harmful. But so how do you address people who basically say that it should not be put on the market, or it should be severely restricted until you can prove that it's going to be okay for people?
We are supporter of the harm reduction theory, and we think that when there is a good opportunity for smokers to do something good for their health, or do not harm their health that much as they do with smoking anymore, then we think that is a win for the personal and public health. And I think the evidence shows that the e-cigarette is a perfect tool for harm reduction.
If I can add on the precautionary principle, we at least know that is much less harmful. Based on that, we cannot use the very same limitation or even stronger limitations to the product as is happening in some countries, just because we want to hide ourselves behind the assumption that we don't know everything about the product. It has to be a proportionate approach compared to the relative risk. So we cannot say it's the same of tobacco. There's really enough scientific evidence that says that it's not the same. So we cannot really apply the very same precautionary principle. Or at least, as a first step, we have to say, let's take tobacco out of the market. That will be a real good approach for health.
We had a related question come in via Twitter as well, which was, is there any evidence that, sorry, I lost the question here. Is vaping just as addictive as smoking, and are there side effects for bystanders? It's a nicotine question, basically, I think.
It's a nicotine.
Yeah.
I will say that it's not an answer to the question, but this year, like in the past years, mid of June, there will be in Warsaw the conference on nicotine, and with a lot of experts over there, and I think that's the good place to get answers about nicotine, because the scientists will be there.
So there's also evidence, I mean not evidence, but it's a fact that you can buy the e-liquids with different strengths as well. So if you want to wean yourself off, you can do that, right?
Yeah, of course you can do that. Yeah, yeah.
So that was all for the Twitter questions that we received so far. Any more questions here in the room? No. Seeing that, I think we can draw it to a close. Dustin and Mose will be happy to stay around for a little bit longer in order to answer any questions you might have one-on-one. Otherwise, I'd just say thank you, and check out the site, sign the petition, and tell your friends.
Thank you very much. And please sign the petition.